On Maplewood Drive, nothing dramatic ever happened. That was why Claire Bennett chose it. Quiet streets, safe routines, predictable days. At 46, Claire believed calm was the same thing as happiness until one ordinary afternoon proved her wrong. It happened without warning, without music, without reason. Claire was standing in her kitchen, staring at a half-empty coffee cup, wondering how a whole morning could disappear without leaving a mark. Her husband David had already left for work. He kissed her cheek out of habit, not affection. She noticed. She always noticed. But she said nothing, as usual. That silence had become her second language. Outside, a moving truck idled across the street. The Harris family's driveway. Her youngest son had moved back home after years away. Claire barely remembered him. A boy on a bike, a blur of scraped knees and loud laughter. He wasn't part of her life. He wasn't supposed to be. The doorbell rang. Claire hesitated, then opened the door. That was the moment. Ethan Harris stood there, taller than she expected, broader, older. Not a boy anymore. His hair was slightly messy, his expression calm, but alert, like someone who paid attention to the world. "Hi, Mrs. Bennett," he said. "Sorry to bother you. My mom thinks our sprinkler line might be leaking into your yard." Mrs. Bennett, the name sounded distant, formal, like it belonged to someone else. "That's okay," Claire replied. "I didn't notice anything, but you can check." They walked toward the side yard together. The grass was damp, the air warm. Ethan knelt near the fence, brushing dirt away from the pipe. Claire watched without meaning to. She told herself she was just being polite. Then he looked up, not quickly, not casually. He met her eyes and held them. Something shifted. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't desire in a simple way. It was awareness. As if he suddenly saw her not as a neighbor, not as someone's wife, not as a background figure, but as a woman standing alone in the middle of her life. Claire felt her chest tighten. "All good," Ethan said, standing. "Looks fine." "Oh, great," she answered, too fast. They stood there for a second longer than necessary. The space between them felt charged, though nothing had happened. "Welcome back," she added, searching for normal. "Thanks," he said. "It's strange being home again." He smiled, and for reasons she didn't understand, that smile followed her back into the house. Claire spent the rest of the day unsettled. She burned lunch. She reread the same page of a book 3 times. Her mind kept replaying the moment, searching for what had gone wrong. Nothing had gone wrong. That was the problem. Over the next week, Ethan became part of the background of her days, a passing wave while jogging, a brief hello while checking. The mail, short, harmless exchanges. But each one left something behind, an echo that lingered longer than it should. Claire told herself it meant nothing. She was bored, lonely, aging. That was all. But then came the morning she heard his voice again, closer than expected. "Careful," she turned sharply. She had been carrying a heavy box out of the garage, filled with old photo albums. Ethan had crossed the street without her noticing. "I've got it," he said, lifting the box with ease. "Thank you," Claire replied, embarrassed. "You don't have to do everything alone," he said, casually. The words landed deeper than he could have known. They stood in the garage. Doorway, sunlight pouring in, dust floating between them. Ethan glanced at the open box. "Those look old," he said. "They are," Claire answered. "Memories. Good ones." She paused. "Some." He nodded like he understood. That afternoon, Claire found herself thinking about all the versions of her life she had packed away, dreams she stopped chasing. Conversations she stopped. Starting, she wondered when she had accepted quiet disappointment as a final destination. At dinner, David talked about work, numbers, deadlines. She listened. She always listened. When he finished, he returned to his phone. The space between them felt wider than ever. That night, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind restless. She hated herself for thinking about Ethan. Hated the way a simple look had shaken her more than years of routine ever did. Across the street, Ethan sat in his childhood bedroom unpacking boxes. He told himself the same thing, that it meant nothing, that she was married, that he was projecting something that didn't belong to him. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her face. The town hosted a small weekend farmers market downtown. Claire went alone, needing air. She moved between stalls, pretending to browse. Then she heard his voice behind her. "Claire." She turned. He was holding a coffee, dressed casually, familiar now in a way that felt dangerous. "Hi," she said. They walked together without planning to. Talked about small things. Weather, the town? How strange it felt to return after being gone. "Do you ever feel like you outgrow a place?" Ethan asked, "but it still owns part of you?" Claire considered the question. "I think places change when we stop paying attention to ourselves." He looked at her differently then, not curious, not casual, intent. "I think you're right," he said. That look returned, clear, quiet, undeniable. Claire felt her breath catch. She turned away first, her heart racing. "I should go," she said. "Of course," Ethan replied, stepping back immediately. They parted without another word. But the damage or the awakening was done. Over the following days, Claire tried. To regain control, she changed her schedule, avoided windows, focused harder on her marriage. She cooked David's favorite meals, asked about his day. He answered politely, gratefully, but nothing changed. One evening, while taking out the trash, Claire heard footsteps behind her. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "I didn't mean to make things awkward." "You didn't?" she replied quickly. "I just need space." "I understand," he said truly. He hesitated. "I hope you know I respect you." That word again, respect. It made everything harder. They stood in silence under the streetlight. The night air was cool, heavy with things unsaid. "This shouldn't feel like this," Claire said quietly. "No," Ethan agreed. "But it does." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. "We can't let it become something else," she said. "I know," he replied. Neither of them moved. Neither of them smiled. They simply stood there, acknowledging the line they were dangerously close to crossing. When Claire went inside, she leaned against the door, her heart pounding. She knew something had shifted inside her that couldn't be undone. She hadn't touched him, hadn't confessed anything, hadn't betrayed anyone in action. But emotionally, something had already cracked. Across the street, Ethan watched her. Porch light turn off. He exhaled slowly, knowing he had just stepped into something far more complicated than attraction. On Maplewood Drive, everything still looked the same. But beneath the quiet, two lives had begun to drift toward a question. Neither was ready to answer. And once that question exists, there is no pretending it never did. Claire Bennett never expected a quiet summer block party to feel like a turning point in her life. Yet, as she stepped out onto Maplewood Drive that Saturday evening, she felt it in her bones. The street smelled of fresh-cut grass and barbecues. Children ran barefoot with ice cream in sticky hands. Neighbors greeted one another, laughing over small jokes. Everything looked normal, ordinary, safe. But for Claire, the world felt fragile, as if the calm could shatter at any moment. She had tried to ignore Ethan for weeks. She had told herself to focus on her marriage, to be a good wife, to remember the life she had built with David. She had rehearsed her boundaries in her head countless times. But seeing him there across the street from her house made her heart skip. He was laughing with a group of neighbors, the kind of laugh that made his entire face light up. He looked younger than his age somehow, carefree, present, unburdened. And suddenly all her careful defenses felt brittle. Ethan's eyes found hers across the crowd. Claire froze for a fraction of a second. It was a brief moment, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. He tilted his head in recognition, smiled faintly, and then turned back to the group. That single glance left her unsettled. She told herself it was nothing, a simple acknowledgement. Yet she couldn't stop feeling the pull, the strange, emotional tug that reminded her she was still alive in ways she hadn't felt in years. Claire wandered through the crowd, greeting neighbors politely, answering questions about her garden, laughing softly at harmless jokes. She focused on the routine, on the motions, trying to convince herself she was safe. But every time she looked across the street, Ethan was there, just slightly out of reach, and each moment made her pulse faster. She wondered if he felt the same thing. It's the same quiet tension that had begun weeks ago when they had first noticed one another. By the time the music wound down and children were carried home by tired parents, the block party had thinned. Claire found herself near the sidewalk, quietly sipping lemonade. She felt a presence beside her before she registered it. "I wanted to make sure you got home safely," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but it carried the subtle intensity that had first startled her weeks before. She turned and faced him. He wasn't smiling this time. His gaze was steady, quiet, and, just for a moment, entirely honest. Claire's breath caught. She tried to remind herself of boundaries. She told herself that David was waiting at home, that nothing could ever happen, that she was responsible for the life she had made. But even as she thought it, her heart betrayed her, beating faster, catching at every word, every glance. "Fine," she said softly, too softly. "You don't need to walk me home." "I know," he replied. I wanted to be here." And just like that, the moment stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Claire looked down, unwilling to meet him directly, yet she felt the tension between them, an invisible cord that had been there all along, fragile but undeniable. She thought about all the mornings she had spent alone while David worked, all the evenings when conversation had dwindled into polite silence, all the moments when she had wondered if life could be more, if she could feel more. "You have to." "Stop," she said finally, a little more firmly, shaking her head. We can't do this." He nodded slowly, understanding without argument. "I know," he said, "but it doesn't make it any easier." And it was true. The emotion between them was not wrong in a simple sense. It wasn't about physical attraction or selfish desire. It was about recognition, about feeling seen after years of blending into the background. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also real. And neither of them wanted to lose that feeling completely, even if they had to step away from it. Over the next several weeks, Ethan began preparing to move out of his parents' house. He had found a small apartment nearby, a place of his own, and the knowledge that he would be gone settled over Claire like a bittersweet relief. Every encounter they had in that short window felt magnified, every word, every glance, every accidental brush of hands. Their conversations became carefully measured. They talked about books, about work, about regrets, about memories. Nothing overtly romantic, nothing physical. Yet the emotional tension was there, always under the surface. Claire spent more time at home with David, focusing on their marriage, trying to rekindle conversations they had stopped having years ago. She cooked meals he enjoyed, asked questions about his day, and for the first time in a long time, listened. Without distraction, David noticed subtle changes. He saw her smile more, engage more, even laugh at small things he thought she had forgotten how to enjoy. He didn't know the cause, but he welcomed it. One evening, Claire decided she needed closure with Ethan. She asked him to come by her porch, a place familiar and neutral, the place where everything had quietly begun. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the street. Ethan arrived carrying nothing but himself, calm and composed. "I'm glad you asked me here," he said softly. Claire nodded. "I needed to say this before you leave, before it becomes complicated." "I understand," he replied. His voice was steady, but she could sense the restraint, the careful control he exercised over his own feelings. They stood on the porch in silence, neither crossing the boundary they had both known all along. There was no touch, no promise, no fleeting gesture. only acknowledgement. A recognition that something powerful had existed between them, if only emotionally. "This can't continue," Claire said finally. "Even like this." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and relief. "No," he said, "it doesn't mean I don't care. It can't go any further." For a moment the street was quiet around them. The soft hum of distant traffic, the chirping of crickets, the warm glow of the fading sun. Claire felt her chest tighten with both loss and understanding. "I'll always respect you," Ethan said. "And I, you," Claire replied. They didn't shake hands, didn't hug, didn't linger longer than necessary. Okay, they simply acknowledged each other's presence and the impact they had shared without letting it become destructive. And in that moment, they both understood the power of restraint, the value of boundaries, and the depth of emotions that could exist without crossing the line. The next day, Ethan moved into his apartment. Maplewood Drive returned to its quiet routine. The grass was mowed. The mailboxes were checked. The same children played in the streets. Nothing looked different. Yet Claire was changed. She had learned that even fleeting, unspoken moments could awaken parts of oneself long buried under habit and duty. She had seen the quiet power of human connection and realized she could no longer ignore the subtle currents in her own life. With that awakening, Claire poured herself into her marriage with a renewed sense of purpose. She spoke to David honestly, shared feelings she had long kept hidden, and worked to rebuild a connection that had dulled over time. She didn't do it out of guilt. She did it because she now understood what silence could cost, and she refused to let quiet indifference define her life any longer. Months later, Claire still found herself looking across the street at Ethan's apartment. Not with longing, but with gratitude. He had reminded her that the heart, even when restrained, still knows how to feel, still knows how to awaken and transform ordinary life into something vivid, emotional, and alive. Ethan had been just her neighbor's son, till he looked at her that way. And that look had changed everything, even if nothing ever happened. Maplewood Drive remained peaceful. Life continued. Children laughed, neighbors waved, and the sun rose and set on the quiet street. Yet beneath the calm surface, Claire carried a story of longing, restraint, and awakening, a story she would never forget. Even in restraint, she had discovered her own strength, her own depth, and the truth that some moments, though fleeting, can last forever in the heart.